Hello, world. Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Braden.
I'm Tommy.
And I'm Zack. Gentlemen, I have a question for you guys that has been eating at me for the last couple of years. Do flying cars already exist?
Interesting.
They do.
What do you think? What do you think?
There are flying cars.
What are your thoughts there?
Yeah,
Like just-
well, I guess
There are prototypes. There are working. I don't think they're available to the public. They haven't been mass produced.
How do you define a flying car?
So tell
that's
me
a
you
good
don't
question.
tell me you don't look at a helicopter and tell me that's a flying car.
I would say that's definitely not a car.
Doesn't have wheels.
Why
I
would a
would say-
car that flies need wheels, Tommy?
I would say a plane is a flying car, maybe.
Or like a flying submarine? Would
Yeah, or a flying bus. Yeah. Airbus is literally what some of them are called. So
Well, I would argue in order for it to be a car or a vehicle of some sort, it would have to be able to move on the ground. Planes, for example, they can move on the ground, but if you take it off a runway, it's toast.
But that helicopter has that vertical ability. It can just lift vertically.
Yeah, but it can't travel on the ground. It has to
doesn't need
leave
to.
the ground in order to
But
get
it
from A to
doesn't
B.
need to.
but I think if we're talking about if it's a car that flies, like a flying car is a car that flies. So it needs to work as a car. I think that's what Tommy's point is. It needs to work as a car and then also fly.
Yeah, so let's Zach, you're from out in the middle of nowhere in
Sure.
Midland. So let's say, for example, I'm in my flying car. Is your house accessible by plane? I don't think
Yeah.
I could land on your
There's a field-
driveway.
There's a oh, you could have. I grew up on a farm, man. My driveway was close to a kilometer long, probably
Jeez.
4 or 5, maybe a half kilometer. I'd say 400 or 500 meters.
Okay, so you were on a farm, but there are areas around you that are much more heavily forested. So you couldn't
Yeah,
land a
for sure.
plane in a dense forest. So you could then fly your car, in theory, close to, land somewhere, and then drive to where you get to. I mean, the reason we have cars and planes and helicopters and these different modes of transportation is because they all have a bit of a specialty in terms of getting you from A to B. There are things a plane can do that a helicopter can't, and things that a helicopter can do that a car can't, and et cetera. So that's why I don't consider any of those to be cars.
So how easy would it be to toss some wheels on a helicopter, though?
But you'd have to.
I'm not an engineer. I don't know.
It can't just have the wheels. It needs to be able to use the wheels.
Well, that's what I mean too. To
You
have
can't
that.
just duct tape wheels to the
I heard-
friggin'
so I-
rigging underneath.
I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson argue for this on a Joe Rogan podcast. So before you think I'm an idiot here or something, he's a pretty smart dude.
Well,
Okay.
I'm
Blew my
conflicted
mind.
now because Neil deGrasse Tyson is brilliant and
Yeah.
insanely smart. I don't know if I put Joe Rogan in that same category. So we have the high and low thing going on here.
But it was his idea. Joe Rogan was like, "How come flying cars don't exist yet?" And Neil deGrasse Tyson's like, "Yeah, they do. They're helicopters, man. They're just too loud. That's why you don't see them. You don't see."
Well, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I see it, but I don't think you'd call it a car. But you don't call a motorcycle a car because it's something different, even though it works basically the same way.
It's true.
Like I said, that would be my argument, is that you can't use a helicopter like a car. So you couldn't necessarily call it a car.
But you
As
could,
where there
just-
are prototypes that exist of legitimate cars that then have wings and can fly. I don't know how well they work, but you, in theory, could use it both as a plane and as a car. So yeah,
Do we
there's
think?
really no answer. That's the best part of that question.
Do we think that we'll assume if they exist already that they will be a thing at some point? Do we think that when flying cars are mass market available, that there's going to be a separate air road system, or will the air roads exist vertically above the current roads?
I don't
think
think you
the-
can have flying cars for the public. I really don't.
Why? Too dangerous?
Yeah, think about how much more catastrophic an air accident is relative to a car. And look how terrible people are at driving cars from a theory standpoint, a really organized system. And think of
Maybe-
all the training that commercial pilots and fighter pilots go through.
You need
I
a
don't know if
different
it's
license.
feasible to train everybody.
You need a
how to
different
fly a
license
car.
then, Tom.
Sorry.
It's like you need a different license then. It's like the people that need a special license to drive a transport truck and stuff like that.
Well, and that's the thing, and not everybody drives a transport truck because it's not.
Yeah, because they don't have the license.
But driving a transport truck is difficult. I don't think most people
That's-
would be capable of like reversing a 18-wheeler
Yeah.
with a
Well,
trailer.
that's why not everyone's allowed to do it, is my point. They get a
That's why
special
you won't be
license.
allowed to do it, Tommy. Me and Braden will be flying around our cars.
Yeah.
Well, even more reason for me not to fly. I'll stay on the ground. I'll stay on the ground if you two are going to be up there.
That
That's
would
all
argue
I'm
be
saying is I
safer.
don't know if we would ever see it as a mass mode of transportation because I don't know if people are going to actually go through all the effort to be allowed
Not-
to fly
I mean,
a car.
No, not mass mode necessarily, but like more like publicly available is my point. I mean, there's probably not ever going to be a lot of people, which maybe does make it safer to Zach's point.
Yeah, air
Not
travel
a lot of
safer than
people.
car travel.
Yeah, that's a good
That's
point.
shit to run into, man.
Well, the standards are higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got more people on the plane.
Special license.
That's true.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. So the practicality of a flying car, I don't think is there. I think the future of transportation is probably the like the self-driving vehicles.
Hmm.
But what
Like
about
where
the Elon?
you have a vehicle that's on a network and you just tell it where to go and it takes you there
The Elon Musk underground tunnels under California.
or
Well, I
something
was
like that.
thinking, yeah, I was thinking that maybe we could go the vertical, whether it be underground or like same with housing. We can't build out anymore that much, so we build up. Could do the same thing with roads, where you've got roads stacked on top of roads.
Do you think it would be easier to stack roads on top of each other or dig roads underneath each other?
I don't know, man.
That's an
You probably have to
engineering
do
question.
both, honestly.
Yeah.
Because if you dig roads, then where do you put all that dirt? And if you build roads up, then where do you get all those materials? You know.
You do both, yeah.
I think going underground would be, I'm just guessing, tougher, especially if you were doing it in urban areas. Because do you know how many things are underneath streets and buildings and roads?
Well, yeah, you got the sewers and
have to
Yeah,
go
so I
pretty
feel like
deep.
it's easier just to
Lines and
slap
everything.
something on top.
yeah. Well, plus a lot of big urban centers already have extensive like subway systems. You know, which maybe that's the future, because it works pretty good in London anyway. At least
Yeah.
people seem to think so.
I mean, now one day maybe I'll be proven wrong. Maybe 20 years from now, we're all going to be at a stoplight in our flying cars, and you're going to look at me and be like, "I told you, you're an idiot."
And they're not going to have any wheels. And I'm going to look at Tommy. I told you, buddy.
Exactly. And I'm going to hear
They
about
don't
it.
need wheels if they can fly.
Well,
And
there's
I'll be
hover
willing to
cars
take
too,
that.
right? There's hover
Oh.
cars that exist too, I think, and they don't have wheels, but I mean
But
they're
are they-
like on the ground ish.
Yeah,
I
if they're
think.
hovering, are they on the ground?
So if it's like a hover car combined with a flying car, I think that would work fine.
Yeah,
there's
I have no
this-
idea.
If there's a stoplight for a flying car, is the stoplight also flying, or is it just really tall?
I think it'd be light. Like, let's say you have headlights, and then like there's just like almost like virtual stop signs on your glass.
Like,
sick would that be?
oh, interesting.
So it's like,
you got
a
like a Bluetooth hook set up, or like the equivalent in the time or whatever.
Oh,
so they
we'll
don't
never
actually
see this.
exist. They exist through like your GPS, and it's just like on
That's
your
cool.
windshield.
This is
That's
like a year
cool.
2500 thing. So we're never going to get there.
I'm
Well, who
living on-
knows? Who knows what's gonna happen, man?
Who knows? Who knows
Maybe
what the
we'll-
future holds?
Maybe we'll be able to upload our consciousness in 50 years.
Or with all the recovery practices we're doing, we're gonna live that long.
Oh, there it is.
Nailed
Smooth
it.
transition.
Nailed
Very
it.
smooth
good.
transition.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Zach, you've already mentioned your name.
Yes.
Do you want to tell the people more about you than just your name?
For sure. So I met Braden and Tommy back at the University of Waterloo, where I was playing basketball and they were training the boys.
Yeah.
So made great friends with
strength
those
and
guys. Yeah. And that's where I really came to love the science side of training. Like, you guys instilled that in us. Like, there's a thought process. It's
Oh,
not
wow.
just, not lift things up and put things down. There's a little bit more to it than that.
Yeah, it's the why. Why are we doing the lifting and the putting down?
And then what happens after, like why we do
Yeah.
it, because of the outcome. And then from there, so I graduated with a kinesiology degree and worked a year as a strength and conditioning coach in Cambridge. and then currently am doing my osteopathic manual science degree, and was working at a couple gyms here in Mississauga, but with COVID and stuff, doing more virtual training and stuff.
Right on. Right on.
Short and dirty.
And then so we wanted to talk recovery, because you know far more about recovery than the two of us combined, I
I
assume.
don't know about that. But
I'm pretty confident.
Recovery gets me so excited because it's literally the part where the adaptation occurs, right? People talk about the stimulus, the workout, or even if you're looking at it from like a mental stimulus, like you're studying, really the learning and the change happens in the recovery process, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where the magic happens.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about how to increase recovery, I come back to two questions that make the most sense to me. So number one, how does the body go about self-healing and self-regulating? To me, the best healer on the planet is the body. And you could even take that a step further and say nature in general, right? Over millions and millions of years, we've accumulated this intelligence of efficient recovery, right? And to say that you can think about or do things to it that it isn't already doing to itself, like in a better in a better way, I think that's a little bit crazy, right? So how does the body go about self-healing and self-regulating? And then number two, how do we support that process? So there's 4 ways I answer this question. And I know we've had a conversation about this before, and we kind of all came to those 4 answers as well. But I'm sure there's 1,000 ways you can answer this question and rationalize how the body goes about self-healing, self-regulating, and how we can support that. So the first one, sleep. Literally 1/3 of our life devoted to recovery, whether it be physical, mental, spiritual. And ways we can support that is just quality and quantity. Number 2, stress management. So how does the body self-heal and self-regulate? Through our autonomic nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight, and then our parasympathetic, which is that rest, digest, that more recovery-based autonomic nervous system. And then how do we support that is through stress management. Number 3 is nutrition, literally the building blocks that we're made up of, right? What you eat is what rebuilds the house after the breakdown. And
You
then
are what you eat.
Yeah,
I was just about to say that. You beat me to it. I didn't want to cut him off though.
You are what you ate too, right? Because the thing you ate is also made up of the things it ate, even if it's a vegetable, the oil, the sunlight, all that stuff.
My dad likes to use that argument to say that steak is the same as a salad, so he doesn't need to eat vegetables.
I agree with him to a degree. And then the last one, sorry, go ahead.
No, and number 4 is what I was going to say.
Number 4. And this is the one we're going to focus on today. And it's literally my favorite. So I'm super excited that we're doing that today, is motion.
Yes.
So motion is literally life, right? If you think of a body without motion, it's a cadaver. Like we had the luxury of going to the University of Waterloo where we got to see cadavers, and there's no motion there. And I don't mean like when I'm laying down on the floor, not moving, I'm dead. But I mean, because there's always motion going on in the body.
I was going to say, even if you're lying down still, there's always things happening, right?
Your heart's beating, fluid's moving around, right? So there's lots of stuff going on always, and motion is literally life. So that's why it gets me so jacked up. So if we think about, and when I'm talking about motion, I'm talking more so about motion of fluid. So fluid is like a currency of health in the body, right? It brings nutrition to areas and then takes metabolic waste out. So how can we support that fluid mechanism? And people, when you think about fluid in the body, people come to the cardiovascular system and they think of the heart, right? The heart pumps, moves fluid through the arteries, through the veins, back to the heart, back to the lungs. And that's all she wrote, which is like a pretty crazy thought. Like the heart is an 8-ounce muscle. It's pumping viscous fluid through these little tubes. And if you mapped out your vasculature, I'm not sure if they've actually done this. I've heard this is like, if you mapped out a human being's vasculature, it's like 60,000 miles long. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but it's long, right? So you have this 8-ounce muscle pumping viscous fluid through potentially, 60,000 kilometers over an 80-year lifespan. Seems ridiculous, right? There's got to be something else going on.
Wild.
Right?
Yeah.
It's got to be
Well,
something else going on.
And when you're talking about fluid too, you're not just talking about blood. There's
Exactly.
more to it. Yeah.
There's lymph, there's interstitial fluid, there's fluid in between cells. There's a whole bunch of different types of fluid. It's not just blood. So if we think about 4 regulators of fluid in the body, we have, or houses of fluid as well. We have our nerves. So we have our somatic nerves, which innervate muscle tissue, and muscle tissue can act as pumps. So it changes shape so that can change pressure and shoot fluid in a different direction. There's also, it creates mechanical stimuli to go back to the central nervous system to help it regulate. And then there is a resting oscillating tone, which is something I just recently found out, which is crazy. So even when you're at rest, your nervous system is increasing the tone of your muscle and then decreasing the tone of your muscle in almost this oscillating pattern to help move fluid around.
Oh, that's sick. That's
so cool.
That's gnarly. Yeah.
So cool. And then you have your sensory nerves, which again, give info back to the central nervous system. So it tells it how to regulate fluid in the body with top-down responses. And then you have autonomic nerves, which is that sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system. And they more control viscera, but they also control the musculature within blood vessels. So blood vessels themselves have a layer of musculature, and this includes the arteries, the veins, and the lymphatics that then can squeeze fluid in and out of areas. And then we have the arteries, which again is just bringing nutritious blood around to areas that have that muscular pump mechanism that shoots fluid through. And what's wicked is that every nerve has an artery that supplies it, and then that artery has a nerve that supplies it, and then that nerve has an artery that supplies it, all the way down to like the smallest vasorum, vasonervorum, nervorum, to the point where like a blood vessel can't even fit through. It's so small. So there's like this interconnected relationship that we call like the neurovascular relationship. And then we have veins and veins and lymphatics, which is drainage. So they require the pumping mechanism of the musculature so that they can then drain areas. Mm-hmm. So when we think about this, the first thing that comes to mind is mobility. So what does mobility allow for with this pumping mechanism? Mobility allows for the space to change, for soft tissues to change shape so that they can create this pumping mechanism of compression and expansion to shoot fluids around in the body, which is like absolutely wild.
Yeah, you sent us a video before this chat, kind of explaining the very basics of how that pump works, and how the arteries have like smooth muscle walls to kind of help them pump, but also constrict and dilate to regulate blood pressure. But the veins do not have anything, and the lymphatics don't at all. And nerves, I guess, like it is a fluid and it's not kind of at the same time. I guess you have your own opinion about that. But it was cool to me how the like the arteries and the veins and the nerves and the lymphatic nodes are all kind of bundled together so that they're all acted on. Like whenever one of them's acted on by a muscle for that pump action, they're all acted on. It's not like, you need to look around for that sort of thing.
Yeah. So there's like fascial packaging. So fascia is that connective tissue layer that goes around pretty much every tissue in the body and works to, it has contractile properties so it can hold things together. And then it also creates pathways for that vasculature. So, and again, even nerves, like people think of nerves as more electrical, but they are fluid in principle as well. Like you have an action potential going down a nerve at the nodes of Ranvier. You have sodium, potassium coming in and out. And if sodium, potassium is coming in and out of something, so is fluid, right? So they're fluid in nature to a degree as well. And the one thing with that, it's actually pretty recent, but a lot of textbooks right now will say veins and lymphatics don't have musculature in the walls, but they've recently found that they do have a little bit, not as much as the arteries because they're not as high pressure of a system, but there is a level of musculature for squeezing fluid in and out of tissues. Super cool.
Yeah,
but
that's cool.
The other thing with the vein component is they have valves. So they have valves that can close to stop regurgitation, but to also create regurgitation. So if I have a pressure coming at a vein to the side, on an oblique angle, up, it doesn't matter where the pressure is coming from, it'll utilize that pressure to either drive fluid up, or if fluid's driving down, it closes the valve, so then it bounces off the valve and then goes back up again. So it doesn't matter which direction the pressure is going in, it can always utilize that.
Yeah, that same video was talking about how the only way pressure can actually go backwards is if it's directly in line with that,
Yeah.
which is super, super hard to do.
You'd have to like grab a vein and literally like drag down in the wrong direction, which why would you do that?
Which is never going to happen.
Mhm.
If you have veins exposed, then you get bigger problems on your hand. So
what I find super interesting about this concept too is it brings a greater importance onto mobility. So if you ask somebody like, oh, you need to be more mobile, they think of it just functionally, like, oh, I need to be more mobile so I can reach above my head, or I can, reach down and grab something. They think about it in this functional way. But our body is built in a giant pulley system with a whole bunch of little pulley systems in between. So every joint is essentially a little bit more complex, but it's a pulley system where you have one side with a muscle attached, the other side with a muscle attached, and then they work as one contracts, it pulls this way, as one contracts, it pulls this way. So if we have a preference for one side of motion, so let's say you have one side that's contracted and the other side can't because this one is contracted, it changes the fluid mechanics in that joint as well. So on the side that's contracted, you have this compression force longitudinally that then is going to decrease the pressure, and then blood generally starts to pool on this side. Now, the other side, you have compression more horizontally, almost like if you were to grab a hose and pull it this way, you're lengthening the tube and then you're decreasing the diameter. So there's an increase in resistance. So you change pressure on the other side. So, and then that's going to affect how that area can heal. And if we think about this on a bigger scale, so let's say just like in the coronal plane, right? I have a preference for side bending right, and I can't side bend left as well, right? So I have this like global compression on the right side, a global strain on the other side, a lengthening, a compression horizontally. That's going to affect the fluid mechanics in the entire body, into the viscera, the organs, how they're going to function. So it's like motion is literally life. Like it's going to affect the fluid, which then affects rebuildability.
So it sounds like it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like it's just cyclical in that if you've got like a problematic area, like you got a tight hip or something like that, then movement of the muscles and everything is restricted within that joint. So that means that movement of fluid is also going to be restricted within that joint, which means that it's going to be harder to get like nutrients and like the healing, molecules and everything into the joint, which just, I assume, means it's going to get tighter and tighter, and it's going to be hard to, if there was damage, it's going to be harder to heal that damage and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly. That's why movement is so important in the recovery process, because it allows for that exchange of fluids, or even just maintaining mobility in joints. And I don't mean like hypermobility, like you got to be able to like, what's the last thing I saw is like when people are like on all fours and like this huge extension, they can do all this crazy stuff. Like that might
need to be a gymnast.
That may be over driving it, because at the same time you need tone, right? If you have mobility without oscillating tone, then fluid's not gonna be able to move either.
Right.
You need mobility so that you can move, you can change shape of things. If you have mobility, but there's no tone so that you can't change that shape, you can't activate that tissue to create that compression, expansion, change, then you're also not gonna be able to move fluid. So that's like that balance of, I need mobility, but I need stability too, even just for health, not just for performance.
Yeah. I mean, that's a balance in every sport, I think, where you like stability breeds like force, which is strength, and mobility breeds movement. Like we talked about this, like it relates to powerlifting in that you want exactly enough mobility to get into the positions that are required for the sport. But having more mobility can be detrimental to the amount of force you can produce, which is the most important thing for the sport. Versus sprinting, we talked about, where you need a lot of force, but it needs to be very quick, which means you can't be stiff. If you need to be fast, you can't be stiff. So there's that balance in all areas of athletics.
Well, it sounds like, Zach, then is the idea behind the movement, is it to optimize pressure within the system? Because basically we have fluid in our body that can move nutrients around, and our heart does a really good job at moving the fluid with nutrients to our muscles, bones, things like that. But the heart can't actually help a whole lot bringing the rest of the fluid back because there's lower pressure systems. So then the movement of us creating muscle contraction, opening up joints, things like that, that creates the pressure change to help bring fluid back to the heart. And then the cycle can kind of just keep moving, correct?
So when I say that mobility allows for the space, it's not that there's no space left. Like your body, there is no space in your body. Your body's a vacuum other than the thoracic cage. Where you're breathing in, you have air coming into the thoracic cage. But everywhere else, there's like no space. So if I get fluid to one area, I'm simultaneously sucking fluid back through.
Yep.
So like there's a whole bunch of new models on how the heart actually works. Like there's a book by Dr. Thomas Cowan that the heart is not a pump.
What
Which
is
is
it?
like yeah, it's like what are you talking about? What else could it be? The heart is a vacuum. So like you said, it's sucking rather than pushing. Because again,
That's
it's only an 8 ounce pound muscle, or 8 ounce muscle. But also how the heart contracts, right? So the heart doesn't just like squish down and open up, squish down, open up. It starts its contraction at the bottom and almost twists through and wrings itself out, right? Which you could just say is like, oh, that's a great way to get all the fluid out. But also, how is that changing how the fluid's coming out? Because fluid doesn't just come straight out like this. It almost vortexes through the arteries. And that can almost create a propulsion effect where it's gained its momentum, like it's building momentum off of the walls. And then there's an increased pressure down the middle.
Yeah.
So it travels in a spiral. Same way like if you were throwing a football. If you throw it in a spiral, it moves faster than if you throw it like a wounded duck. Then it just kind of through the air.
Interesting. Well, I mean, yeah, the artery walls are elastic, right? So I imagine that it is like building momentum, like using that structure to.
This is super cool that you brought this up. So so I know I remember this in class in university where they talked about the aorta almost works like a balloon, so that it constantly kind of stays full, so that there's just a constant pressure. But it's not really like that. There is still like levels of like almost like balls of fluid, ball of fluid, ball of fluid, ball of fluid, ball of fluid, right? Like at a super small degree. Like it's still like there's not like gaps of space, but there's like an oscillating pressure. And what your sympathetic says, your sympathetic nerves are what innervate the musculature of the walls of the arteries. So when it feels that fluid is coming, it will relax so that as the fluid comes in, it has that elastic ability so that it can dilate to its largest degree, and then it will contract to push that fluid out. So it's utilizing that elastic component with the contraction component to push fluid through, and that's happening all the way down to maintain pressure.
So it's kind of like the stretch reflex, the stretch shortening cycle in muscles a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's cool.
Super cool.
So it just kind of, yeah. I mean, we were just talking before we started recording about how like your body is always trying to conserve energy and do things in the most efficient, least expenditure way possible. So that's really interesting.
Super wild. And then like we were talking about how these things are packaged together is because they can use the force of each other. So the arteries is a higher pressure system. It has that kind of pulsating aspect of it. And veins love to travel nice and close to that because they can use that force to then drive fluid back up the other way. And again, with that muscle pump too. Like they're all packaged together so there's no wasted space. It can utilize every inch of that compression and then the expansion of the sucking effect of the expansion.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's super cool. So if you didn't have, like, we talk about the muscle pump, so that's us, like if you go for a walk or you work out, or I mean you're just, if you're literally just moving at all, moving your body, then your muscles are contracting, relaxing, pumping fluid through. But if you are not, like, obviously we're sleeping a large percentage of the day, and sometimes people will just sit in bed all day and watch Netflix, but fluid is still moving. You talked about the oscillating muscle pump before. If you're not moving at all, how detrimental do you think that is to, let's just keep it physiological. Obviously, if you're not using muscles, then they're going to start to atrophy and stuff. But just physiologically.
Short term, not that much. Like we can handle that during sleep. Like you said, we have this oscillating pattern that happens. We don't need as much blood flow while we're sleeping because there's not a lot of activity going on. There's a lot of healing that's going on, and the body does a good job at putting blood where it needs to be at those times. But over a long period of time of not moving, not having immobilities in areas, that's going to accumulate. And that's where we see structural issues start to come up. So 100% over a long period of time. I can't say for sure, like what time, the amount of time, because everybody's going to be a little bit different. Some people are more susceptible to things than others, but it's going to have an impact on your overall health, 100%. Yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. Is there any benefit to blood? Like you mentioned that the heart is going to, or like the cardiovascular system is going to like deposit blood more so where it's needed and where it's not. And you're just saying how it's a closed system. So if you're putting it somewhere, then you're pulling it from there as well.
Yeah.
How can you, like, how does that work if you're like concentrating the amount of blood in an area, or that's different than blood pooling in an area?
Yeah. So blood, there goes the mic. Blood pooling to me is when it's getting stuck. Right. So when we're talking about blood going to like for example, you're sleeping, blood's going to your organs a little bit more for healing. It's not that it's going to the organs and just staying there. It's like it's cycling through that area.
Like a higher volume of your blood is cycling through that area than would otherwise be the case. Okay.
It's not staying there. It's just cycling through. It's just like when you exercise, it seems like blood is just like stuck in your muscles, but there's just more oscillate, or I keep saying that word because there's oscillations all over the body, but there's just more cycling through that area.
Okay.
So blood pooling, like, again, I'm not a doctor, so I can't say like medically blood pooling, but to me, blood pooling is when something's getting stuck. It's pooling. It's accumulating and having trouble leaving. Where it's still leaving for sure. Like if it just stayed and it was completely stagnant, you'd get tissue death because there'd be no oxygen. Like even when a joint is swollen and it's compartmentalized, that inflammation and blood, it's a little bit harder to get in and out, and it's kind of staying there a bit. It's still getting in and out to a degree, but it's dropped maybe a couple percent or more than that. Like blood flow to an area by 3, 4, 5, 10% is going to make a huge difference to the amount of nutrients and the amount of waste that's getting taken out of there.
And that's just all. I mean, I guess healing is the only reason that it would concentrate in different areas. Like if you're increasing the percentage of blood going to a specific area, like the only reason to do that would, I guess, healing or activity.
Yeah, exactly. Like cellular metabolism. It's gonna keep pulling on the cord. The stand was a mistake. You were right. Yeah, like you said, either healing, which like healing costs energy too. That's why nutrients are coming in. It's a process that's going to burn some energy as well. So yeah, cellular metabolism is going to bring blood to an area.
What is the benefit to swelling then, I guess, or is there one? Or is it just protection, like stiffening, anything to stiffen the area to protect it?
So again, I'm not a doctor, so this is my understanding of like the inflammatory cascade. And yeah, like you said, fluid. I gotta stop going on this. Fluid brings nutrition to the joint, right? inflammation is a little bit different because it's now accumulating. It's compartmentalized that area because there's been damage and it's trying to protect it at the same time. So like evolutionarily, when you injured your knee, you still had to move, right? You had to work around that damaged tissue. So it almost created a splint for you, as well as so that you can get to safety, right? Like if you're getting attacked or something like that, you could get to safety or fight off whatever, finish the fight or flight response. But at the same time, it's bringing fluid, and then that fluid's gonna have nutrients in it to a degree.
That's super cool. The natural splint thing, super cool.
Natural splint. So a great example of this is it's one of my favorite muscles is the respiratory diaphragm. So this muscle is almost like a double suction cup. So people think of it as it changes thoracic pressure. So when you breathe in, it decreases the thoracic pressure less than the atmospheric pressure so that air can come in. But if it's changing thoracic pressure and dropping it, blood's going to come in too. Has to, right? But fluid follows the path of least resistance. So when I take a deep breath in and out, I'm pulling fluid from and to upper limbs and pulling fluid from and to the lower limbs. And the respiratory diaphragm is not the only diaphragm in the body. There's the pelvic diaphragm, there's the oral diaphragm, and these things work together to change pressure in different regions. But because it's a vacuum and there's no space, they impact each other. Like the pelvic diaphragm is going to impact fluid above, not so much as the respiratory diaphragm. It's a little bit bigger, or the oral diaphragm and all that. So these diaphragms are working together to change pressure and move fluid throughout the entire body.
I actually didn't know that.
Well, it's a fixed system, correct? Like there's only so much fluid in the body.
It's a closed system. Yeah,
exactly. So it's the suction cup, or the motion that you're describing is simply if I need to move more fluid to one part of the body, I inevitably need to have less fluid as a result in another part of the body because there's a fixed amount of fluid that you have available.
And you're always doing that by changing the pressure. Because it's like you said, fluid's only going to go, like it's going to go wherever there's lower pressure, which means probably there's not fluid there. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah,
sorry.
You go. No, you go.
I was just going to say, and that's a practical thing you can use, like the respiratory diaphragm or the pelvic diaphragm, right? Have you ever done a Kegel?
Yeah,
Have you heard that term?
Yeah.
So like you're contracting your pelvic diaphragm, and like some people will say like, I don't believe that the pelvic diaphragm is influencing the thoracic diaphragm. It's like, okay, you can test it, right? You take a deep breath in, you breathe out all the air you can, right? You contract your abdomen, push out as much air as you can, then do a Kegel and tell me a little bit more air doesn't come out, right? Because now it's added more pressure. It's changed more pressure, which again, if you're pushing more air out, more fluid is coming top down.
Oh yeah, I mean that's right. Like if you try to push out all of the air, like if you actually try to push out all the air, then you feel that contraction in the pelvic diaphragm as well. That's cool.
And even if you do that Kegel at the end, where you feel like there's like no air left, you do a Kegel, you'll be like, there'll just be like a little bit more air because it changes that pressure. You can just try it at home. I do it with my breathing exercise. It's crazy. And then you can breathe more air in, and then if your goal is to hold your breath longer or whatever.
That's cool. I had never heard of I mean, I've heard of the pelvic diaphragm, I think, but I had never heard of the oral diaphragm.
Yeah.
Like, is that their whole job is just to change pressure in different areas?
To change pressure and to hold things together. Like the especially the pelvic diaphragm is holding a lot of organs up. It's almost like that's why they call it the pelvic floor. Because it's holding a lot of these things together.
Holding the pelvic bones together to some extent as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they're like crisscrossing different muscle actions, different bones, but it's creating a floor that then moves very similar to the pelvic or the respiratory diaphragm up and down, doming and coming up and down. And if you think about why, like we just talked about the respiratory diaphragm with blood, like because it's so big, blood in the extremities. Think about blood in the pelvic viscera. Right? When we change pressure, blood's going to shoot up. And then when we change pressure back, it's going to suck fluid back in. So your body is utilizing so many different forces to move this fluid around. And it's even more than just the soft tissues. So people think of bone as very static and dry. But if you remember back to like anatomy, there's canals of vessels like Volksman canals that have arteries, veins, and nerves that run through them. And because there's no space, there's going to be a level of fluid around that. So if we come back to that pulley system, we have that pulley pulling on both sides of that bone, oscillating forces going through the bone. That's going to change fluid. It's going to allow for better diffusion of fluid in and out of the bone, so that I get more nutrients into the bone.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I know there's lots of studies on loading bone for increasing bone mineral density and strength and decreasing risk of injury and all that stuff. So it's just cool to have a way to explain it.
Well, yeah, no adaptation if you don't get fluid in there to deliver the stuff that's gonna adapt to the stimulus.
Exactly.
Sorry, I just want to go back to the diaphragms for a second.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. So when you brace, people talk about intra-abdominal pressure, right? You take a deep breath in, so you're pushing that diaphragm down. I imagine that your pelvic diaphragm is also sucking down and allowing more space for like the organs and everything's getting pushed down.
Yeah.
And then you hold that air in, so you're creating now more pressure in the thoracic cavity. You're keeping that diaphragm like pushed down, both diaphragms pushed down, and all the fluid that you brought up into that cavity would now be getting pushed out as well because of the increased pressure when you hold that air. So then that extra pressure is just like you're squishing your organs and like all that fluid into that abdominal cavity as hard as you can.
Exactly.
That's sick.
And they can handle it, right? That they're designed to be able to handle that changes in pressure like that.
Yeah.
Like there's always a balance. Like there might be like if you're doing that all day, like there might be issues with that, but they're designed to do it, and it's helpful. Like you're literally squeezing the fluid, the blood out of them, so that it can make it back up past gravity through the veins, through the lymphatics, back up to the heart, and then to the lungs to get nutrified.
I did, the nutrition guy that I used to work with, he mentioned that bracing and just like all of that high abdominal pressures can irritate the bowels specifically, is what he was talking about, the intestines, and like shear the intestinal wall and stuff. And then you like post exercise have a harder time or like what do you call it? Leakage, abdominal leakage, so that like bigger proteins and food particles can slip through the wall into the bloodstream instead of getting digested properly. Like
a leaky gut.
Yeah, exactly.
I could see that. Like you're creating all this pressure, and then you're putting like 400 pounds on your back, and then you're holding your breath and like moving weight up and down, whatever, through a squat, through a deadlift, and you're changing force, different forces in different planes. I could see how that, like at some point, a tissue is going to yield. That's why our body's designed to load bone. It's because it yields the least. Like a great example is our foot. So the bony aspects of your foot is kind of on the lateral side, if you feel, and then you have your arch. So and this is just like an opinion on gait. I'm sure there's thousands of opinions on gait. When we load the foot, it kind of comes down onto the heel and onto the lateral portions and then onto the toes, because there's a springing effect that's great for sprinting, and I'm sure like can increase force in that arch. But at some point, that tissue is going to yield and break, right? And bones are just designed to be able to hold the forces more, so that's why they're a little sturdier. And I can imagine like the viscera in your GI aren't designed to hold a lot of forces. Some, for sure.
It'd be interesting to see how they adapt to it, though. Like if they
get hard.
if the like a power lifter's intestines are like calloused or something like that.
Fibrose for sure.
That'd be really cool.
Be a cool study to look at. Because that's what tissues will do when you yield them more. So your body again is trying to be as efficient as possible. So if you're what's a good example? So let's say you have like a compensation pattern in your body, right? And it's because it's protecting a spot of your body. It doesn't matter, but you're in this compensated position. Initially, that's going to be from being held by muscular contraction, right? Just through reflexes, my body's going to hold this here, just so I can keep my eyes straight. Initially, that's going to be from muscular contractions, which requires energy. But over time, if you hang out in that position, your body wants to be as efficient as possible. So it's going to lay down that fibrotic tissue, almost like ropes, so that it can turn the muscles off, and it's just being held together. Like there's a chemical change in the extracellular matrix, so that's just being held together now, and it doesn't have to use energy.
Interesting. So when muscles are getting like stiff or short or whatever, like that's what that is. Like
Over a
it's
long
just-
period of time. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. That's really cool.
But it makes sense. It's efficient, right?
Of
Not for
course.
us. But again, and then when that happens and you have that fibrous tissue, now you've taken that mobility away further, and now you've changed the fluid mechanics in that local area or in that joint or whatever.
Interesting. So then when you have that sort of a thing, how easy is it to get out of it, I guess? If you got that fibrous start of thing, like kind of like the muscles changing because you hang out in that position so much.
So again, I'm not a doctor, so I can't give medical advice or anything like that, but it's going to be very person dependent and very time dependent. So depending on how long it's been there, how much fibrotic tissue has been laid down will take, like if you've been in this position for 10 years, you can't expect to, roll it out and then a week later it's moving great, right? So it's a process. It's a process, and it's not necessarily a pressure process. So that's not the best way to say it. What I mean by that is, like, if this tissue is now so fibrosed, you don't really want to just go in there and like grind it out, because that tissue can get so hard. It can get cement. It can become stronger than cement. You have a better chance of breaking the bone than you would actually like breaking up that tissue. And if you do break up that tissue, let's say, how's your body going to respond? It's like, damn, I didn't lay down enough fibrotic tissue. I got to lay down more now, right? If you haven't fixed the cause of it, the underlying cause of the compensation pattern, that's just going to keep coming back. So it's more of a, and how your body gets rid of it is a circulatory issue, or change, just like it was when it put it there. It's a chemical change. If you can get more fluid there, then you have a better chance of that. Like I said at the beginning, how's the body self-heal and self-regulate? How do I support that? I get more fluid to that area. I get more health to that area.
Right. So then you're just using your pumps to drive fluid through.
Yeah. And then cool. maybe you're going to see a manual practitioner who knows how to deal with an issue like that.
Is that like the fibrous? Is that the same thing as muscle knots, or is that something different? Like, people talk about muscle knots and trigger points all the time, and I remember learning something that it's like the cross link in the sarcomere gets kind of like stuck or something like that. I don't know how true that is. I remember that coming up in a kid class at one point, but
so it's very subjective. Like when we say a muscle knot, like you put your hand on someone's back and you feel like something hard there, right? So it could be fibrous tissue. I don't know about the actual level. Like, a muscle doesn't tie itself in a knot, right? The sarcomeres don't like get all tangled in a fisherman's knot or whatever. They can fibrose, or it could just be a contraction, right? The whole muscle doesn't always have to contract at the same time. There can be areas of it that are more contracted than others. It could be a bone, right? So if we have a vertebrae, for example, they can side bend and rotate. So if we have a vertebrae that's just stuck in rotation on one side, and you can feel something in the muscle, that could just be like the transverse process pushing back against the musculature, and you think that's a knot or whatever, and then you start grinding on that, and then you damage the muscle or whatever. So it totally dependent, and it's very subjective. Like, you'd have to X-ray to really get an idea of what's going on, or you'd have to have a really good palpation to be able to, an experience to be able to differentiate what the physiological or the anatomical changes that's happening there. And what's sorry, you brought up the sarcomere, which is crazy. I was just looking at a recent study that looked at, so we have our myosin and actin that come across, and then they come out, And even that change in pressure helps fluid get pushed out of the sarcomere. So you have calcium coming in and out, and the contraction itself, the expansion and compression, literally helps like solutes get in and out of even at the sarcomere level, which I know is still like a theory.
Well, it makes sense. Like it's literally a muscle contraction.
It's just looking at it more focally. Like it's crazy.
That's really cool though, because I guess like calcium is the thing that allows for that attachment of the actin myosin, right? So the calcium's got to get in there and out somehow, which means fluid. Which is, it's cool that I guess the contraction that the calcium is causing is the pump that's pushing the fluid that allows the calcium to move.
It's creating its own energy.
Yeah.
Or it's utilizing free energy that's around it. So
what do you think, Tom?
With all that, like taking practical takeaway from all this, because and really it's just theory. It's like, oh, you move this, fluid goes there. Like, what do I do about that? Right. And in terms of recovery, and I always come back to the most simple answer. It's like, make sure there's mobility and then move the tissue so that fluid can move. And there's so many different ways you could rationalize depending on what areas you want to recover, or if there's an acute injury and how to tackle that.
How would you, if you're giving someone like a mobility drill, I guess, or like when you say make sure there's mobility, what exactly are you meaning? Like that the tissue itself can move freely?
So depending on the joint, you want to make sure there's physiological range in the joint. So at my elbow, I want to make sure that I can, flex and extend to the points where I can fully expand that tissue and fully compress that tissue.
Right. Because if you don't have the full range, then that means part of the tissue is compressed or stretched. Like as you're saying at the beginning, where like if you have an easier time moving this way, then that means this side's short and this side's strained.
Yeah. Like looking at it globally. Yeah. And it's going to take away from that potential mechanism or the potential of fluid getting in there. Like the more you can compress something, like if you have a sponge and you compress it down to as hard as you can, and then you put it in water and let it suck, you're going to be able to get more fluid than if you can only compress it a little bit. You're just taking advantage of the pressures.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty common, I think, like across practitioners or education, schoolings or whatever, that one of the first things anyway in rehab is to just make sure that you have full range of whatever the injured joint is. Just make sure you've got full range is the very first thing, which it's cool to hear like a different rationalization of that.
And I think sometimes it doesn't get the importance it should. And again, it's like, maybe it's like there's some pain. Oh, you just got to get it moving, just because like then you'll be able to reach over your head or whatever. It's like, it's a lot more than that. It's like, it's health, right? It's moving fluid, it's moving blood, it's moving nutrition and taking out metabolic waste. Like we're looking at it from the nutrition side. What happens if it's stuck and now toxins and metabolic waste accumulate? Like, how's that going to affect the tissue? How's that going to affect the pain response or the accumulation of the lack of mobility? There's just way more benefit to being mobile, moving around more, beyond just the adaptation of, I want to get some more muscle mass or run a little bit longer or whatever the performance goal is.
Is there, I feel like this is maybe going to be a bigger question than what we have time for, but getting that full range in a joint, what is your thought process there? Like, how are you doing that if a joint's a little bit, like if you can't fully extend your elbow? What's your thought process there?
What's really tough about it is the body's so good at hiding things, right? So if you're looking at global motion of somebody, They might be able to turn this way. They might be able to turn that way. It looks generally good. They might be able to flex. They might be able to extend. The body's good at hypermobilizing areas so that areas of immobility are hidden, right? So I can still, like, let's say at my scapulothoracic joint doesn't want to rotate up and down. I put my head up, or my hand up, I can still get my hand up top. I bring it down, I can still bring it down. But then when you isolate that joint, that scapulothoracic joint, it doesn't move. Or you watch the guy put his hand above his head and it's the scapula staying down, but he's still reaching above. Now that's the GH is hypermobile because that issue is hidden. So it's really tough. You have to, like, it's all assessment. The key is assessment. The easy part is to get mobility back. The hard part is to figure out why the immobility is not there. And I'm still, as a personal trainer, trying to figure out how do I stay in my lane with this and still give the person the greatest benefit. So what I like to do, have you guys heard of CARs, or corrective articular rotations?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Like hip cars. I've heard of that.
Yeah,
Like flying cars? No.
I thought for a second, have you heard of Cars, the vehicle? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So
cool.
that's one of my favorite exercises or mobility exercises, because now I can isolate joints, right? We start at the wrists. What do the wrists do? They flex, they extend, ulnar deviation, whatever. You can rotate them both ways. We're going to start there. We start to create mobility there actively and dynamically. Then we go to the elbow. The elbow doesn't rotate, right? But it flexes and extends. So I'm going to go there and make sure we have flex and extension. Then I go to the GH, internal external rotation. Then I go to the scapulothoracic. It's going to move, rotates upwards and downwards, protracts, retracts. So I work through each joint and make sure that I'm actively moving each segment. Because if I were just to do a big global dynamic exercise, like let's say like a high knee, I'm just pop, I'm high knee. Who knows what's being hidden from an immobilized perspective?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So at least I have the opportunity for some joints. Some joints are really hard, like my spine, the facet joints of the spine with that side bend rotate are really, really good at hiding spots of immobility, because they can just compensate a couple segments up, compensate a couple segments down. And that's why I struggle giving a mobility exercise to someone who has, like what we talked about, like just this chunk that you can tell just hasn't been moving in a long time, right? It's just stuck. And like, as a trainer, I used to be like, you know what, let's say it's in the T-spine. Let's do some T-spine rotations, right? But then you start to look and you can just see that chunk stays, right? And then below is just like working for dear life. Like the lumbars are just rotating like crazy, and that chunk is just along for the ride. So you're not really fixing the problem. You're hiding it more, right? You're feeding more into you're strengthening the compensation pattern. So it's tough. That's why I try to be as almost on the side of caution with the mobility side of it. And then that's what's great. You can refer out and then have a discussion with the practitioner that you referred out to. What should I avoid? What should we do? Let's have a conversation. Like, that's super important. Because you don't want to feed into the problem.
No, absolutely not. But it's good that you bring that up, because I think joints that are easier to isolate than you can, to an extent, like problem solve on your own. You know, obviously if you're working with other people, you probably don't want to be doing that. But with yourself, you can kind of experiment and figure things out. But in a situation like the spine, where you have this chunk that's not moving at all and everywhere else is hyper mobile compensating for it, like, you're not going to figure that out by yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's good to know that there's situations that you probably can't just mobilize your way out of. Like, you need to go see somebody else to get it moving.
Exactly. And another thing too is people are looking like for this fancy stretch, right? And then they do their 10 minutes of stretching a day, or their 10 minutes of dynamic mobility a day, and then that's it. I'm sitting in a chair the rest of the day. It's like, I always come back to this, is like 90% of your goal of whatever it's going to be is going to come from consistency, not complexity, right? How often in the day are you getting up and doing those cars, or that dynamic, or even just a walk, right? Getting around, moving around. That's going to play a bigger role, because now you're consistently bringing fluid. You're moving fluid around. You're consistently moving that joint around. The body has the opportunity to recalibrate more often, right? Because if I'm in a seated position more often than I'm standing or doing my walks or whatever, my body's going to become more efficient in the position that I'm in most of the time, or consistently throughout the day. So if I make that walking, or if I make that sitting, it's going to come real good at hunched over here, locked up. Like it can just hold itself up. I don't even need muscular action. Right. But if I'm keeping it on its toes, I'm walking, I'm doing, like lunges or whatever, like every hour I'm moving around, I'm adding to that movement where I'm moving fluid around. And now I'm adding to the mobility perspective where the body doesn't have a chance to adapt to efficiency because I'm throwing it for a ringer every hour. Right. And it doesn't have to be the same thing. Like make it fun. Like you're brushing your teeth in the morning, use your left hand, stand on one foot, like tap your head, whatever. Like there's all these different ways that you can activate muscle, have fun with it. And like even build new skills. The more positions you get yourself in, the better your body gets at those positions. And then the less likely, like the more positions that you have, like people talk about neuroplasticity in your brain, but there's neuroplasticity in the musculature as well, right? It can get good at positions. The more positions you throw at it, the better it can get at those positions and the less likely you're going to get injured. Because really injury happens when you get into a position that you've never been in before, or there's like an increased force or speed or in that position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. The more different stuff that you do, the less specific your body can get with the adaptations, the more it has to be available for variation and things like that.
Exactly.
So that's cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, we talked about movement helping you, or use movement to help you recalibrate. And I think we can agree that something else that can help people recalibrate is music.
Yes, sir.
Whether it be with training or anytime throughout the day. So what were you guys listening to this week or recently? Even over the holidays, Zach, since we haven't talked to you in a little bit.
I'm always back to my old classic rock playlist, but honestly, I've been getting into more listening to podcasts and stuff like that while I exercise. And then we were even talking about this a little bit at the beginning. And then when I get to my hard set or the hardest part of the workout, then I crank the exercise. I use it more as a tool for the hardest part of the workout or the day or whatever.
Right on.
Classic rock, baby.
What about you, Tom?
A lot of EDM playing this week. A lot of the, electro, house, dance. I don't know. I was just feeling good. So you want to throw something on with a little more energy, a little more, rhythm and even that kind of happiness to it. A lot of the music I listen to is so dark and heavy that this is a little more like lighter, and I don't know how else to describe it, but maybe it's because I was excited that Zach was coming on the show.
Uplifting.
I was like, feeling like on a higher level. So then that was influencing it. I don't know, but yeah, a lot more sort of like EDM, house, techno, dance kind of stuff playing this week.
In your conscious flying car.
Correct.
Yeah, up on the next level.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to have a feel-good playlist, I think.
Yeah, that's what I've described it. It's like a guilty pleasure, feel-good playlist.
That's such a weird musical term, I think, guilty pleasure.
Well, because you don't want people to know, like, I have a reputation to uphold.
Let's name drop a couple songs, couple artists on your guilty pleasure.
Like there's a few tunes by some of the new stuff from The Weeknd has like an 80s synth pop feel to it. So I would normally never listen to The Weeknd, but this new album, even though it's like pop music, it's got this kind of like, energy to it, or even just a lot of songs that have been like pop songs that get then remixed by well-known DJs like Martin Garrix or Tiesto or Daft Punk or somebody like that. So that would be the type of stuff.
Right on.
You guys got to listen to, this is one of my favorite guilty pleasure songs. Love Shack by the B-52s.
Oh, that's not a guilt. That's a That's an absolute banger, that song.
That's just pleasure, huh? There's
That
no
song
guilt
is
there.
fantastic. That's not a guilty pleasure. That's you can tell the whole world that you like that song.
Oh yeah, that is a banger.
That's a big tune.
Do you have any actually guilty pleasure songs, Zach?
That honestly is one. What's
Well, songs that you don't want people
to.
to know about that you're now gonna put on
Well,
the
no one's
internet.
actually going to say that.
Yeah,
That's the whole point. You don't want to actually tell people.
Well, I'll say it. I guess one of mine is "Party in the USA" by Miley Cyrus. I really
no
like that
way.
song. Yeah, I really like that song.
Oh, I got it. I think we're alone now. Have you heard that song?
Who's it
I
by?
think we're alone now.
No, I don't know that one.
I gotta see who it's by.
I mean, if I have to pick a guilty pleasure song, I hate country. I'm not a country music fan, but
Oh, I love
American Kids
country.
by Kenny Chesney is a catchy tune.
That's cool. If you like a country song, I got to check that one out.
It's a good song.
Yeah.
Like I said, I would never want to admit that to people because I'm not a big country fan, but that would probably be maybe my number one pick because I do genuinely like that song. And I don't know why. Because it's not good because it's country, but I like it.
Country's good. New country's good. I don't like old country.
I think this was like within the last 10 years.
Johnny
like-
Cash, buddy.
You like
Get
old
me fired up. Holy.
old country and classic
Wholesome
rock,
Pleasant Prison. But that one song's by Tiffany. I think we're alone now by Tiffany.
Oh, I don't know who that is.
Give that a listen.
We'll have to listen to it now
Yeah.
just to find out how bad it really is. How guilty should he really feel?
No guilt. All pleasure.
Well, there you go. Yeah, my answer is boring too. Still BTS. I listened to Stray Kids a little bit. They kind of suck though, honestly. It's that's more K-pop, in case you're wondering, Zach.
I was.
But yeah, Stray Kids. It's more like a house dubstep kind of feel. But personally, I think they kind of suck. I did check out what was the one you said last week, Within Temptation.
Oh, I don't know what, but they have a bunch of cover songs.
Yeah. I like that one. I like those guys are pretty cool. So big fan of that. But mostly, yeah, when I've been working out, I've just been like when I'm doing a set, music's on. When I'm resting, been reading. And I finished the series I was reading before, in case anyone in the audience cares that. And I liked it. So anyway, yeah, that's what's been going on with me musically. Yeah. Anything that either of you want to say or plug or whatever before we peace off?
Well, thanks to Zach for coming out and spending some time with us. I think that's the most important thing to do.
I honestly look so forward to these. They get me so jazzed up. So I really appreciate you guys having me on and letting me talk some nonsense with you guys.
It's always
We're
fun.
gonna have to do another one because I don't think we answered any of our questions that we had beforehand. We just got so into the weeds with it.
That's my fault, probably.
No, it was
all
good.
over the
Good.
place.
It was good. But yeah, we'll have to do another one of these soon for sure.
Sounds great, man.
Mm-hmm. So if people want to reach out to you, Zach, where can they find you?
They can find me at adaptive_athletics on Instagram or BioLink Performance on Instagram as well.
Yeah, I just saw that. What's that about?
So it's a brand my friend started that is geared around a network of specialists. So there's chiropractor, there's trainers, there's mental health coaches, nutrition coaches, and we're doing a lot of virtual nutrition and training
Nice.
for individuals.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's dope.
Yeah, man.
That's dope.
Very exciting.
And Thomas,
What about me?
if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Oh, well, of course. That's why I was confused because we do this all the time. Yeah, people can find me on Instagram at Speed Strength Performance. And you'll find things that you may or may not be interested in. Who knows?
There you go.
And of course, on the Speed Strength Show, you can find me. So if anyone wants to go back and listen to other episodes, then they're available. And everything's linked in the bio and the descriptions and stuff.
Yep. Speed Strength Show on Instagram and Braden Southern on Instagram for me. And that was it. So I guess everyone look forward to part 2 of Movement with Zack Marchildon. And
The French
yeah,
sniper.
yeah.
Hey, tabarnak.
Anyway, thanks for coming along, world.
We'll see you
Peace.
next week.
Peace.